Today I'm going to teach you how to play TimeStrike Shadow of Fear, which uses the Source system. Source is a tile system that has various themes, so you will be able to pick whatever theme appeals to you of the ones that are available. My theme is Desert, so it may look different than what you have, but it should still play the same. Just a quick breakdown of the components of the game. First, you have your rulebook. Then there are 20 miniatures. They also come in a colored plastic variety. I don't have those yet, but should be getting them. 10 character boards. 100 8mm marker cubes, 20 gold, 30 blue, 50 red. Although that's more yellow than gold. 16 custom 6-sided dice. 6 stackable walls. And it comes with a folded source foundation. 24 resource and road tokens. The road being on the opposite side of the resources. 36 tarot-size cards, 7 Boss Battle Royale, 12 Boss Raid, 8 Trials, 9 cheat sheets. Or I guess tarot cards. 55 playing cards composed of 24 items, 20 fish, 8 artifacts, 3 character cards, 2 beast, and 1 sentience mob. 1 hardcover lore book. And of course, the box to hold it all in. Now, some important notes regarding TimeStrike. It is a scalable game. The Shadow of Fear box comes with everything needed for games from 2 to 8 players, but multiple sets of TimeStrike can be combined to accommodate groups of any size. Source terrain sets can also be used to further expand TimeStrike maps. Most rule exceptions are found on cards. If a contradiction to the rules is encountered during gameplay, refer to the card first and the rulebook second. The Adventure Together community is also on Discord. They have a channel specifically for rule set clarifications, and they love to help. They will do their best to get you back to adventuring together as soon as possible, and you can visit them anytime at https://discord.gg/adventuretogether. I can probably just put that link in the description. Now, before we get too deep into the rules, we're going to go over some general information about the core components and some helpful keywords. First is dice. Dice will be referenced throughout the game, starting with the quantity and concluding with the type. For instance, 6-sided dice will be referenced as both D6 and 2D6, where the D6 indicates the type of dice to use, and the 2 indicates how many of that die to use. These 6-sided dice are referred to as combat dice, or D6, and are primarily used to resolve combat. 3 of the sides show an attack icon and referred to as hits when rolled. 2 of the sides show a defense icon and referred to as blocks when rolled. 1 side shows a black symbol, which is referred to as a void when rolled. 1 of the attack and defense sides have a gold background, which is referred to as lucky. Some cards and abilities make use of these lucky sides. Then you have your D20. The 20-sided dice are referred to as D20s. When using a D20, the default mechanic is to roll a 10 or higher to succeed in any action unless otherwise specified. If players are rolling D20s against each other, all ties are re-rolled unless otherwise specified. Markers. Marker cubes will be used to track changes to characters throughout the game. Each character card has slots in the health bar, the buff, curse, awakening, and exhaustion stat columns for holding these markers. At the start of the game, character card slots are filled to represent inactive stats. As the game progresses, markers will be removed to reveal active stats beneath. If a slot is gray, it means that the stat can never be active, so players can leave it empty. Friendly or enemy units. When an attack, skill, item, or other effect refers to a friendly or enemy unit, use the following criteria. Friendly unit is a unit considered friendly if both players who own the unit agree that it is friendly for that specific instance. Enemy unit is considered an enemy if it is controlled by a different player and is not on the same team. Now we'll go over some Hex and Tile Types. And the last time I'm going to mention this during this video is that my theme that I chose is Desert theme, so it may look different than what other people have chosen. In this video, my desert dunes are going to represent the base type. TimeStrike plays on a hex-based map, which can be considered and constructed before and during gameplay. Each hex and tile has a type. As I said, this will be my base. Base hexes represent normal areas and do not serve any special function in the game. My resource type hexes, Obsidian and Runite from the Desert theme, are gatherable throughout the game, using the mine action, and can be used for building and crafting. The darker one is Obsidian, and the lighter, more blue one is Runite. And the Desert Stone Road is going to represent my building hexes, roads, and they're used to create roads, which allows units to more easily move around the map. These can be built using resource hexes. And just so you can see where I may make a mistake eventually in this video, the desert water, is going to represent a liquid hex. This is Runite, and it looks pretty similar to me. Anyway, this is going to be liquid tiles, water, and it allows units to fish and are more costly to move through. You cannot build on top of liquid tiles. Tiles are considered to be one elevation lower than hexes. Base, resource, and building hexes all fall under the category of land hexes. Hexes and anything occupying them that are next to each other are considered to be adjacent, regardless of any height difference between the two hexes. Now we're going to use the mana worms here to break down character boards. Character boards are the main component players interact with to control their characters throughout the game. What follows is a breakdown of all the different parts of a character board, starting with the front. So up here, this is considered the top left of the board and lists class, unit count, height, and energy. The bottom left is going to represent the name, race, and faction or origin of the character. And adjacent to that information is the character's hitbox in gray and vision point in red. What, was red and green taken? The health bar is centered at the top center of the board where damage markers can be placed. To the right of the character artwork is a character's base move, range, attack, and defense stats. These are the character's starting stats, and where player begins counting when calculating their total stat value. It also lists the movement type and range type. And to the right of each stat are stat modifier columns for awakening, buffs, and curses. Every row relates to a base stat and will either add or subtract from its value. Below stats and stat modifiers is a row of unique statuses. Exhaustion is used to track your character has already taken a turn during the current round. Stealth, Enrage, Affliction, and Silence are covered in detail later. And then over here on the very right-hand side, we have a character's skills that are listed on their character board. The top left of each skill has a type, in this instance, attack on mana missiles, which, that is the top right, is the name of the skill. And the lower text below that describes how the skill works and may show additional stat changes. And flipping over to the reverse side, the back of the character board lists the character's playstyle with a summary of their backstory. This is followed by their name and class along with a point value used for skirmish mode, which is right down there. And I'm just going to call it Tajado. Like Tajado here, some character cards do not have full boards but use playing cards instead. They can't be given awakenings, buffs, curses, and do not have skills. Character references. Character. When the term character is used, this refers to all of the units associated with a single character. So if a character has two miniatures, they are both considered to be a single character. Unit. When the term unit is used, this refers to an individual miniature. Miniatures associated with survivors, monsters, mobs, and the Sentience are all considered to be units. Multi-unit characters. Certain characters have a unit count greater than 1. These are multi-unit characters. When taking a turn with a multi-unit character, each unit is activated individually and performs its own separate movement and actions, but they are all considered to belong to a single character. Each unit also receives damage individually, unless they have an ability stating otherwise. Both of the multi-unit characters in the Shadow of Fear set have abilities indicating that their units share a single health bar. Multi-hex units. Some units are so large that they take up multiple hexes. These are referred to as multi-hex units. And when the game references the Lost, all that means is units on the map that are not controlled by any player. Then we have classes. Classes associate characters with specific mechanics in different game modes and are listed on the character board cards. For example, Survivor is a character that is initially drafted for the Boss Battle Royale and Boss Raid modes. Sentience is the world boss that must be defeated in the Boss Battle Royale and Boss Raid modes, but cannot be drafted in Skirmish mode. A beast is a character that can be tamed by survivors and falls under the category of monster. A brute is a character that can be tamed and mounted by survivors and falls under the category of monster. And now let's talk about building the map. TimeStrike comes with a source foundation, a thick foldable cardboard map that can be laid out and played on. The TimeStrike experience is meant to be used with the source system, which allows for three-dimensional map building and destruction. As you proceed through the rulebook or the rules video that I'm presenting, rules and imagery will focus on the use of the source system itself. But you can play it on the foundation that comes in the box. Because you never know what anyone's state of owning the game is, and there's value in everything presented, we are going to go over the source foundation. If you are using the source foundation, you can follow the setup steps below. Step 1 would be unfold the source foundation map with the desert theme side face up. Now you can grab your resource tokens, in this case the obsidian, and place them randomly around the map. Throughout the rules, these will be referenced as resource hexes. Materials are gathered from resource hexes by characters and used to build and craft. When placing resource hexes, I suggest placing them in groups around the void. They can also be stacked on each other as well. Now, in this piddly little visual example, it doesn't reach the recommendation. The recommendation is placing approximately 20 to 30 resources on this source foundation. Now we are going to go over the source system. If you're using the source system, follow these setup steps. The first of which is getting your source themes. Source hexes come in 4 different types in this game. Base hexes, sometimes referred to as land, liquid tiles, sometimes referred to as water, resource hexes, and building hexes. In the desert theme, these are represented as sand, the base, water, liquid, obsidian and runite, resources, and lastly stone roads for building. If you don't have the desert theme, each theme should still follow this format so you can substitute hex types to match the theme you are using. Step 1 is place the edges. Place and interlock edges to create a play area of the map. The edges of the map are used to define the boundaries of the game and to hold dice and markers. Feel free to play with the angles of the edges and build as many different shapes and sizes as you can imagine, or are capable of with what you have. Step 2 is going to be filling in your base layer. Place the base layer of base hexes, sand, for characters to move on. Once you're done, the base layer of the map is the foundation of the game and cannot be changed by the sentience or other effects. And then you begin step 3, which is adding water and elevation. Now, keep in mind, access to water is important to gameplay and is required to perform actions like fishing. Then you can place additional base hexes to create elevation. Liquid can be placed on elevation. Now, elevation is important because it affects how easily certain characters can move across the map. Elevation can be destroyed during the game. It also allows characters to gain height advantage or to hide from ranged attacks during combat. And note that roads and walls can be added during map setup, but can also be built during gameplay. And then step 4 is add resources. Place resource hexes, obsidian and runite in this case, around the map. Materials are gathered from resource hexes by characters and are used to build and craft. When placing resource hexes, it is suggested placing them in groups around the void. They can be stacked on top of each other as well. It's recommended to be placing approximately 20 to 30 resources for an 8-edge map, or 3 resources per edge, with more. Now you have your map and you're ready to choose a game mode. Within TimeStrike, there are multiple modes to choose from. Each mode can scale to accommodate different players and character counts. For new players, it's recommended starting with a skirmish mode to learn the basics of the game. But we're going to start by going over Boss Battle Royale mode. A Boss Battle Royale is the flagship game mode featuring a battle between players and a massive world boss. The players will have to work together to defeat the boss while also trying to defeat each other and be the last team standing. In this mode, the boss can defeat all the players and win the game. This mode can be played with teams or as a free-for-all. Skirmish mode. The skirmish mode is a straightforward battle between players. Players will agree on a point total, then draft characters within that limit and battle it out to be the last team standing. This mode can be played with teams or as a free-for-all. This is a great game mode for learning some of the basic gameplay mechanics. And there is the Boss Raid mode. The Boss Raid mode is a solo or cooperative mode where players will draft characters and work together to defeat the world boss. The players will progressively advance through the multiple phases, earning rewards for the players but also increasing the power of the boss. Once the boss's health is depleted in the last phase, the players win. Once you've chosen your game mode, you can find the corresponding setup instructions in the rulebook starting at page 15 or in the chapters of this video. You'll select one, and after setup is complete, you move on to the player turns section of how to play. Quickly going over the snake draft method. Starting with the first player, take turns picking characters. The first player selects, followed by the second player, continuing until the last player makes their first pick. The order then reverses, allowing the last player to make their second pick first. This process continues in reverse until the first player makes their second pick. The last player to pick in each round has the choice in the subsequent round, balancing the first pick advantage in any given round. Setting up for skirmish mode. First, step 1, designating a card area. Designate an area where multiple decks of cards will be placed. Players will be using cards in this area throughout the game. Then, you will place your cards, locating the item, artifact, and fish decks. Shuffle each deck individually, then place each one face down in the card area. Then, you'll determine your point limit. Set a point limit for players to draft characters. 200 to 300 points is recommended for a standard game. Gather your character boards and beast cards to select from. Regarding point values, survivors count as 100 points, brutes count as 100 points, beasts count as 50 points, and the Sentience counts as 300 points. Then you will determine the player order. Players determine order by rolling a d20. Each player rolls, and the player with the highest roll becomes the first player. Play then continues clockwise. You will then draft your team. Starting with the first player, players take turns picking one character at a time until all characters for each team have been picked. It's recommended to do the snake draft method described earlier. Then, after drafting is complete, players will draw one trial card corresponding to each of their survivor-type characters on their team. On the front side of the card is a list of trials that can be completed by that survivor to help awaken their stats. Once a survivor is fully awakened, they can earn their listed reward on the trial. So here's an example of Roland Rumpus's trials. Then you will place your teams in the void. In turn order, players will choose hexes adjacent to the edge of the void to place their entire team. Characters belonging to the same team must be placed adjacent to one another. And then you'll start play. The first player in turn order will start the game, and play will continue clockwise in that direction. If that's all you're interested in to get set up the skirmish mode, you can skip to the player turns chapter of the video. To set up for the Boss Battle Royale, you'll designate your card area. That's where multiple decks of cards will be placed. Players are drawing from and referencing these cards throughout the game. Specifically, you'll locate the item, artifact, and fish decks. Shuffle each deck individually, then place each one face down in the card area. Then find the beast cards and place them in the card area. Search throughout the character boards for any brute characters and place these in the card area as well. Like so. You'll then set up the Fears cards. Take the Fear deck with the red borders reading Boss Battle Royale on them. Search through the deck and locate the card which reads Stats that has Phase 1 on the side and Phase 2 on the other and set it aside. That would be this one. You will then shuffle the remaining action cards and place them face down in the card area. Then set the stat card with Phase 1 side up in the card area. Like so. Then you will determine the character counts, deciding how many characters each player will use during the game. Gather the character boards that are marked as Survivor to choose from. The character count must be the same for each player. It's recommended to do 2 to 3 per player. Then you'll determine player order. They turn order for drafting teams, placing characters on the map, and playing the game. Roll a d20 for each player. The player with the highest roll goes first, and play continues clockwise. Then you will draft your team, starting with the first player, taking turns picking one survivor-type character at a time until all characters for each team have been picked. Players will then draw one trial card corresponding to each of their survivor-type characters on their team. On the front side of the card is a list of trials that can be completed by that survivor to help awaken their stats. Once a survivor is fully awakened, they can earn the listed reward on the trial. Then you place Fear. The last player in turn order must place the Fear miniature anywhere on the map that it fits, with its base supported by a flat surface of at least 5 hexes. Fear's base takes up a total of 7 hexes, but up to 2 can be unsupported. It's recommended to place fear near the center of the map when playing. That's a little better. And then you will place your monsters. In turn order, place a monster miniature for every 2 survivors that will be played. This means that for games with 2 to 3 survivors, 1 monster is placed. For 4 to 5, 2 monsters, and so on. The first monster should be a beast, and every second monster should be a brute. Then you locate the corresponding monster cards in the card area and place them face up. Then you place your teams in the void. In turn order, the players will then pick hexes adjacent to the edge of the void to start their entire team. Characters belonging to the same team must be placed adjacent to each other. And then you'll start play. The first player in turn order will start the game, and play will continue clockwise in that direction. You can now skip to the player turns section of this video if you want to skip the boss raid setup. To set up for the boss raid, you'll start by designating a card area. It's where multiple decks of cards will be placed. Players will be drawing from and referencing cards in this area throughout the game. Placing cards like item, artifact, and fish decks first. Shuffle each deck individually, then place each one face down in the card area. Then you find the beast cards and place them in the card area as well. Search through the character boards, and any brute characters will be placed in the card area as well. Then you'll set up Fears cards. Locate the Fear deck with the gray borders reading Boss Raid on each of the cards. You'll then search through the deck and locate the 6 cards that read Stats on one side and Setup on the other. Set aside 3 of the 6 which read Boss Raid Gauntlet. Order the remaining 3 cards from Phase 1 to Phase 3 and place them so the Setup side is face up. Shuffle the remaining action cards and place them face down so it reads Boss Raid face up in the card area. And that will look somewhat like this. There is a version of these cards that are marked as Gauntlet. This is for players who want to start an extreme challenge just to see how far they can make it fighting fear. It is not recommended trying this version until completing the normal boss raid a few times. Or you can do it, because rules are meant to be broken, because it says refer to the card first, and the card says do the Gauntlet. You will then determine the character counts. It's deciding how many characters each player will use during the game. It's recommended 1 character per player, but you can choose to use multiple. Gather the character boards marked as Survivor and choose from them. At this mode is intended to be a solo cooperative experience. You don't have to adhere to a turn order when drafting, placing units, or taking turns during the game. Players are free to take their turns in whatever order they want, and they can even perform their turns simultaneously. You will then draft your team. Starting with the first player, players should take turns picking 1 Survivor-type character at a time until all characters for each player have been picked. You will then get the trials and not draw them, because awakening and artifacts are rewarded for completing phases of the boss. You will then place Fear. Place the Fear miniature anywhere on the map that it fits, with its base supported by at least a flat surface of 5 hexes. Fear's base takes up a total of 7, but up to 2 can be unsupported. It's recommended placing Fear near the center of the map. You will then set up the raid. On the first phase card marked as Setup, there will be lists of steps to follow. Follow these steps for spawning monsters and mobs and any additional steps that are taken. The center 7 hexes represent Fear's position, with the arrow showing which way Fear is facing. Then spawn the corresponding lost units on the hexes marked by Fear. Then you'll place your characters in the void. Each player can place their characters on hexes adjacent to edges of the map. If a character has multiple units, they must be placed adjacent to one another. And then you'll start play. You can now move to the Player Turns section of this video, or on the rulebook, page 17. Step 1 of a player turn is choosing a character. Starting with the first player and continuing clockwise, each player will choose 1 non-exhausted character on their team to take a turn with. At the end of their turn, the player must mark that character as exhausted, and that will continue until all characters in play are marked as exhausted. This triggers the end of a round. After choosing characters to take your turns with, the player can activate each unit belonging to that character, including any monsters that character has tamed, and use that unit's movement and energy stats to move them around the map and perform actions. And don't forget, that is listed on your character card. And a special note is no more than 4 units may be activated in a single character's turn. Remember that a unit can use any amount of its movement and energy in any order, meaning you can move, perform an action, and then continue moving, or however. After performing an attack action, that unit may no longer use any more of its movement for the remainder of a turn. So you can use your energy and stuff, just remember that attacking stops your movement. If a unit has unused movement or energy remaining after being activated, it may be activated again later during the same turn. During a character's turn, its controller may activate each unit belonging to that character and each monster that that character has tamed. Note that units belonging to a multi-unit character for each activated individually and can each use the full movement and energy stats listed on their character board. Exhaustion. After taking a turn with a character, exhaust that character by removing the marker from their exhaustion slot. Players will continue taking turns with different characters on their team that aren't exhausted until all player characters are exhausted. At the end of the round, and after the lost have played their action card, all exhaustion on characters is reset. If it is a player's turn and all of their characters are exhausted, but other players still have non-exhausted characters to use, that turn is skipped. Now, when setting up a character board, fill in all the colored slots that have numbers or symbols in the Awakenings, Buffs, and Curses stats columns. And then you'll place a marker in each character's exhaustion slot. The health bar. At the top center of each character board is a health bar for that character. It lists the total health that each unit belonging to that character card has. In this example, 4. Whenever a unit takes damage, place a marker in its health bar for each damage taken. Whenever a unit regains health or is healed by a skill, fish, an item, or other effects, remove a marker from its health bar for each health received. Once a unit receives damage markers equal to or exceeding its total health, the unit is defeated. A unit's health cannot exceed the amount listed on the health bar. Calculating stats. There are several different ways in which a character's stat may be modified. When using a character's stat, always use their total stat, which can be calculated by performing the following steps. Check your character's base stat. Check to see if there are any awakening, buff, or curse modifiers in that row. If using a skill, check to see if the skill modifies the stat. If a character has an artifact equipped, check to see if the artifact modifies the stat. Then you'll add together those values in steps 1 to 4 to determine the total stat. So for example here, we'll say Roland Rumpus has a base move of 5 and his buff is active, so you would add 1, so you'd have a total of 6 movement. Movement. The movement stat on a character, abbreviated as MOVE on the character board, determines how much movement a unit associated with that character can use during their activation. Moving between 2 hexes of equal or lower elevation uses 1 movement. 1, 2, 3, 4. Moving multi-hex units. When moving a multi-hex unit with a base that takes up 2 or more hex spaces, also referred to as 2 hex, 3 hex, etc., decide which end to lead with, for instance, the front or the back. Then move the unit so that the other end follows the same hexes that the leading end just left. When moving a multi-hex unit across uneven hexes, the unit must continue moving its unit until its base is able to rest completely on even hexes. Regarding obstacles, units cannot move through enemy units, friendly units that are engaged with enemy units, walls, monsters, or other obstacles. The only thing they can move through is other units on their team if those units are not engaged with an enemy unit. Now let's go over some movement penalties. There are 2 types of movement penalties when moving: swimming and climbing. For swimming, whenever a unit is on a water tile, they are considered to be swimming. Units that are swimming require 1 additional movement to move between hexes. For instance, moving between 2 adjacent same-level water hexes uses a total of 2 movement. Moving out of water from water to land also uses a total of 2 movement. Moving into water from land does not use additional movement and is not considered swimming. So, we'll use this movement of 5, starting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we'll discuss climbing. Climbing is when a unit moves to a hex that is higher than the hex the unit is standing on. Count the difference in height between the 2 hexes to determine how much total movement it will cost to move to a higher hex. 1. Why was that 1? Well, that's because since the difference between any hex and an adjacent hex 1 level higher is 1, units do not need to use any additional movement to climb to a hex that is only 1 level higher than their current hex. So to get up here, that would only be 1, 2, 3. There are different movement types. All characters have specific movement types of either walk, swim, fly, or burrow that is found on their card next to their movement stat. Movement types can mitigate certain obstacles when moving and or alter different interactions. Note that if there is no type listed next to the movement stat, this means that the unit has the default movement of walk. Walk is the most basic type of movement and is subject to additional movement costs for swimming, climbing, as described earlier. Swim allows a unit to ignore the movement penalty for swimming. This means that units with swim movement type do not use additional movement while swimming. Fly allows units to ignore the movement penalties for swimming and climbing. This means that units with fly movement type can move from one hex to any other adjacent hex by using one movement, regardless of any height difference between the hexes. They can also move over things that typically block movement, like enemy units, walls, and other obstacles, as long as they are able to end their movement on an unoccupied hex. Units with the fly movement type are also never affected by fall damage during their own activation. Lastly, units with the fly movement do not engage units when moving by them. Only if they stop do they become engaged. And burrow. It allows a unit to ignore the movement penalties for climbing. This means that units with the burrow movement type do not use additional movement when climbing. They can also move under things that typically block movement, like enemy units, walls, and other obstacles, as long as they are able to end their move on an unoccupied hex. However, a burrow movement type can never move up or down overhangs, even if it's being contested. Units with burrow movement type are also never affected by fall damage. Lastly, units with the burrow movement type do not engage units when moving by them. Only if they stop do they become engaged. Overhangs. An overhang is when one or more hexes are above another hex with space between. Moving under them, units can move under overhangs if it is not less than half their height rounded up. A unit can only stop under an overhang if the miniature itself fits. Moving up, units can only move up an overhang if it is not greater than their height. Flying units can move onto overhangs regardless of their height. Going over falling. That can occur when a unit moves down to a lower adjacent hex. If the difference in height from its starting hex to its target hex is equal to or greater than the height of the unit, they are falling. Certain situations other than normal movement, such as jump attacks or being contested, can also cause a unit to fall and take damage. So this was a fall of 9. His height is 4. He fell. Now, regarding taking fall damage. If a unit falls a hex distance equal to or greater than the height, it rolls 1 combat die after the unit lands. For each multiple of their height, they must roll 2 additional dice. Each hit counts as 1 damage. So let's raise that up to 11, and he fell again, and since he has a height of 4, he falls 11 hexes. That's more than double his height, but not quite triple, so he would roll 3 combat dice to determine how much damage is taken. If a unit of 3 height falls 9 hexes, they would roll 5, and so on. You can fall from destroyed terrain. Whenever a unit must be moved because of a land is being destroyed under them, use the normal falling damage rules from their starting hex to their ending hex directly underneath them. If there is an obstacle or other unit already occupying that hex, pick any adjacent hex to fall onto, even if the terrain type is different. Roads. A connected area of building hexes is called a road. Roads help units move around faster and allow them to ignore fall damage when moving along the road. A unit on a road hex may use 1 movement to move and or climb any distance along that road. So, here's an example of a continuous road. If a unit with the fly or burrow movement type chooses to use a road, they are not considered to be flying or burrowing in this process, so they will be blocked by other units or disengage passed by units. However, they can simply choose to not use the road. A unit may only use a road for the length that its base is contained by the road for its movement. For example, a 7-hex-sized Sentience may only move down the road if it can always fit all 7 hexes moving down that road. Engagement. Whenever two units occupy adjacent hexes, both units are considered to be engaged with each other. The exception would be if units are adjacent to each other at different heights, the lower unit's height value must be equal to or greater than the number of levels of elevation between the bases of the two units. If the hex height is greater than the lower unit's height, those units are not engaged. So yes, engaged, no. When a unit is engaged with an enemy unit, it may not target any unit that is not engaged with. Also, certain actions may not be performed when engaged with an enemy unit. For example, fishing, mining, and trading cannot be performed by an engaged unit. If units have effects that would resolve at the same time, the active player chooses the first effect to resolve. They do not have to choose their own effect. Other players then resolve their effects in turn order. This prevents the active player from resolving two effects before others resolve any. For example, this may happen if two units have skills triggered upon engaging with another unit or during a jump attack on a target with an engagement skill. You can also take cheap shots. A cheap can be triggered by fleeing an engagement, character skills, or other scenarios. A unit rolls 1d6 for a chance of dealing damage to the target unit. If the unit performing a cheap shot rolls a hit, they deal 1 damage to the recipient of the cheap shot. Since a cheap shot is not an attack action, units cannot defend against a cheap shot. Nope. Lost units do not perform cheap shots in the Boss Battle Royale mode. Lost units will perform cheap shots in the Boss Raid mode, but do not roll for the damage. They just automatically deal a damage. Fleeing an engagement. When a unit willingly leaves an engagement with an enemy unit by using its movement, it is considered to be fleeing the engagement. In this case, the enemy unit may perform a cheap shot against the fleeing unit. The cheap shot happens immediately after the unit enters a hex where it is no longer engaged with the enemy. If a unit flees engagement with multiple enemy units, each disengaged unit may perform a cheap shot against the fleeing unit. However, there are exceptions. A unit is not considered to be fleeing an engagement if it leaves due to the contest or climb sentience action, an ability is cast on them that moves them, or if an item is used to move them. And just a quick little combat tip, staying engaged with enemies is a great way to prevent them from using their energy efficiently. And now we will go over actions and energy. During a unit's activation, that unit can use its energy stat to complete unique actions before, during, or after using its movement. All actions require 1 energy to use and cannot be performed more than once per turn by the same unit. Each individual unit of a multi-unit character may spend the full amount of energy listed on that unit's card. Note that no more than 4 energy may be used in a single character's turn. This would also apply to a survivor with a tamed monster. And note that the same action cannot be done multiple times by the same unit during a turn. For example, a single unit with 3 energy cannot mine 3 different times, but a character with 3 different units that have 1 energy could mine with each of those units when activating them during their turn. This is what makes multi-unit characters strong gatherers. There will be different lists of actions and units that we will go over and that they can take during their turn. First, we'll start with fishing. Action. Fish. The fish action allows units to catch fish from the water that can heal, cleanse, and buff characters. With a little bit of luck, fishing can also provide valuable treasures. So how do you fish? If a unit is on a land hex adjacent to an unoccupied water tile that is lower than the unit's base, the unit may use 1 energy to perform a fish action and roll a d20. Remember that you're rolling for 10 or higher. Oh, look at that, 20. So, on a successful roll of 10 plus, the player will draw 1 fish card and place it in the inventory of the character that performed the fish action. Units engaged with an enemy cannot perform the fish action. I love gold! Action. Mine. The mine action allows units to collect materials that are used for building roads and walls. So how do you mine? If a unit is adjacent to an unoccupied resource hex, it may use 1 energy to perform the mine action and collect 1 material. The player will take the resource hex and place it in the inventory of the character that performed the mine action. The resource hex cannot be more than 4 hexes below the unit's base or 4 hexes above the height when mining it. Resource hexes that are in a character's inventory are referred to as materials. Units engaged with an enemy cannot perform the mine action. Revisiting fishing for a moment, there is also a critical fishing failure. If a single hex unit rolls a 1 during the fish action, that unit critically fails and falls into the water hex that they had targeted to fish in. Action. Trade. The trade action allows units to pass various loot throughout the void. Materials, fish, items, and artifacts are all considered loot when trading. How do you trade? Well, a unit can use 1 energy to perform the trade action with any character regardless of the distance or line of sight between the two characters. The active character can transfer 1 loot from their inventory to the target character's inventory. The target unit has the option to transfer 1 loot from their inventory back to the active character. This means a character may both give and receive loot during a single trade action. Units engaged with an enemy cannot perform the trade action. The unit targeted by the trade action cannot trade back if it is engaged with an enemy unit. Units that are on the Sentience may not participate in trade actions. Action. Climb Sentience. Each Sentience has multiple tiers which can be occupied by units. While on the Sentience, units can attack the Sentience as well as other units on the Sentience. In addition, units that are on the Sentience cannot be targeted by or target units, whether friendly or enemy, that are not on the Sentience. So how to climb the Sentience? If a unit is engaged to the Sentience, it may use 1 energy to perform the Climb Sentience action, allowing the unit to climb to any unoccupied tier of the Sentience. Units that are on the Sentience already can instead use the Climb Sentience action to either jump off the Sentience and be placed on an unoccupied hex adjacent to the Sentience, or move to a different tier on the Sentience. The Sentience cannot target units climbing on its own back unless specifically stated. Units on the same tier of the Sentience are considered engaged. Units on a Sentience tier above or below a unit are also considered engaged with that unit. Note, units do not take fall damage when climbing off or being knocked off of the Sentience. Action. Contest. The contest action allows units to challenge other units for positioning. Contests can result in swapping positions with opposing units or pushing the opponent unit out of their position to an adjacent position. Contesting can be used to push enemies off high elevations, swap positions to take over the high ground, force disengagement without risking cheap shots, or simply to assert dominance. So how do you contest? If a unit is engaged to an enemy unit, it may use 1 energy to perform the contest action against that unit. During a contest, both players roll 1d20, and the action is successful if the active unit rolls higher than the contested unit. Contesting players may add 1 to their roll for each remaining health on their unit, and 1 to their roll for each hex or Sentience tier higher their unit is than the other contestant. Note that ties are awarded to the defender. So we'll just say in this example here that Roland contests this Legion unit. Roland rolls a 16 and adds 6 to his current health for a total of 22. The Legion only rolls an 8 and adds 4 for his current health, and 3 for the number of hexes above Roland that it is for a total of 15. In this case, Roland would win the contest. If the contest action is successful, the active player can switch the positions of the 2 units. Like so. Or the active player can instead choose to push the contested unit by moving it 1 hex in any direction that is lower or equal to than the unit's current position. Now, if it went the other way around, keep in mind that units that are contested are subject to fall damage. That's if they are pushed, not units that are swapped in position. Regarding cheap shots, since the contest action does not use the unit's movement stat, units moved by the contest action never receive cheap shots. When it comes to contesting different sized units, units can only contest units with an equal or lower hex size. A 1 hex unit cannot contest a 2 hex unit, a 2 hex unit cannot contest a 3 hex unit, and so on. Contesting on the Sentience. Units can also contest each other for positions on the Sentience. A unit on a tier of the Sentience cannot contest another unit on an adjacent tier of the Sentience. If successful, the contester may either switch positions with the contested unit or place the contested unit on any unoccupied space adjacent to the Sentience. Action. Tame Monster. The Tame Monster action is an attempt to take control of a lost monster, beast or brute, and add it to your team by using a fish. Failing to tame a monster, however, will result in the monster attacking back. Note that only survivors may tame monsters. How to tame a monster? If a survivor unit is engaged with a lost monster, the unit can try to tame it using a fish. The unit will use 1 energy to discard 1 fish and roll 1d20. To succeed, the unit must roll greater than or equal to 3 times the monster's current health. A failed tame roll will result in the monster dealing damage back to the unit who tried to tame it. A beast will deal 1 damage back, a brute will deal 2 damage back. And note that damage can be blocked using a monster trap. Taming a beast. If a beast is successfully tamed, it regains 2 health, and its character card is placed next to the character board of the unit that tamed it. On future turns, the tamed beast can now be activated when taking a turn with the character that tamed it. This effectively allows you to activate multiple characters during a single turn. Taming a brute is a little different. If a brute is successfully tamed, it regains 2 health, its character board is placed next to the character board of the unit that tamed it. Place the unit that tamed the brute onto the mount slot atop the brute unit. The 2 units are now referred to collectively as a behemoth and are subject to special rules. If the active unit was previously mounted on a different brute, that brute will revert to a lost unit controlled by the Sentience. A tamed Abaddon. Action. Cast ability. The cast ability action allows units to use an ability type skill on their character board. How to cast ability? If a unit's character board contains a skill labeled as Ability, that unit can spend 1 energy to perform the cast ability action and use the character's stats. Action. Attack. The attack action allows units to attempt to damage other units. Any unit can target and attack another unit by using the attacking unit's range and attack stats. After performing the attack action, the active unit may no longer use their movement for the remainder of their turn. Let's go over targeting a unit. The following rules apply for any action, skill, or item that requires a unit to be targeted, not just the attack action. When an action, skill, or item requires a target to be selected, check to make sure that the targeted unit is first within the range specified by the action, skill, or item. If no range is specified by the item, then it has unlimited range. Then, check to make sure if the target unit is within line of sight of the unit using the skill, item, or performing the action. Checking range. To check range, count the number of hexes horizontally between the unit and its target. Do not include height or vertical hexes in this count. If the target is within or equal to the specified range, it is considered within range. So, you would do an imaginary top-down, or a literal top-down if you're standing at the table. Checking line of sight. Line of sight is used to determine whether one unit can see the other unit. Establishing a line of sight is required when attempting to target a unit unless a skill or item specifies otherwise. Unlike range, the line of sight is a straight line drawn between the targeted unit's hitbox and the vision point of the unit that is selecting a target. Line of sight is unrelated to the number of hexes between 2 units. And, going back to their hitbox, it looks like he has a clown nose. So, for example, on Bozo here, the red dot is the vision point and the light gray is targetable. So you'd check your vision point of the targeting unit and the hitbox of the target unit. So you'd stand behind the unit and see if its vision point can literally see any part of the targeted unit's hitbox. If an unobstructed straight line can be drawn between the targeting unit's vision point and the targeted unit's hitbox, then the targeting unit has line of sight. So for here, we could see that he could see Moggy under the overhang, but from his vision point, you can still see this wing right here. And Legion's wings are targetable. And note that only the active player may turn their units while targeting another unit. Regarding targeting through other units, a unit may attempt to target another unit even if there are other units between them. But the targeting unit must still have clear line of sight to their target. If the unit, or units, between the targeting unit and the targeted unit fully obstruct the line of sight, then the targeting unit is unable to successfully target the unit. Attacking a unit. If another unit is within range and line of sight of a player's unit during their activation, the active unit may use 1 energy to select and target and perform an attack action. How to attack? Select the unit as a target for the attack. When performing the attack action, the targeted unit must be no further away than the attacking unit's range stat. Remember that a unit is engaged with an enemy. It may only target units it is engaged with when performing the attack action. Calculate the total attack stat by checking the attack stat on the character's board, as well as any modifiers incurred by height advantage, awakenings, buffs, curses, or an equipped artifact. So for example here, we have a base of 2, +1 for awakening, +1 for buff, but -1 for curse, and +1 for height advantage, which we'll go over later. So that would be 5 dice. Then you'd subtract the curse, so 4. Roll dice equal to the attacker's stat. Each rolled attack icon counts as a hit towards the target, and after performing the attack you may no longer use movement. And note to be aware that characters may have effects from lucky sides, which is the gold background on the symbols you're looking for. Regarding area of effect, certain skills, attacks, or other effects may affect multiple hexes or units and is known as an area of effect. Area of effect is sometimes referred to as a capital A, lowercase o, capital E, an AoE. In this case, the attacker still only rolls for the attack once, and each unit that is affected by the attack rolls defense individually, in an order chosen by the attacking player. AoE skills may be used while engaged as long as the target of the AoE is a unit the attacker is engaged with. And note that area of effect skills, attacks, and other effects hit all units within the specified area or range, including friendly, stealth, and even the unit that initiated the AoE unless otherwise specified. And now, returning to this attack, we'll learn how to defend an attack. When a unit is attacked by another unit, the attacker rolls at least 1 hit. The defender can choose to defend itself from the attack. If the attacker doesn't roll any hits, the defender cannot roll for defense. So how to defend? Well, calculate the total defense stat by checking the defense stat on the character's board, as well as any modifiers incurred by height advantage, buffs, curses, or an equipped artifact. So for example here, Legion currently has a base of 3, but also has an awakening of +1. So 4. And if you recall, there was an incoming 3 damage. So each rolled defense icon will count as 1 block from the defender. So we rolled 2, and a lucky one. Provided the lucky one did not provide any effects, any unblocked hits receive damage to that character. And for an example here, Enchanted Armor would tell you what to do if you rolled that lucky block. Roll at least 1 lucky block to block 1 additional hit. So that's just a reference to pay attention to your abilities and your characters, and make sure you use everything you can in combat. Returning back to what we mentioned earlier, height advantage. If one unit is on a higher hex than another unit, it is considered to have height advantage against that unit. Height advantage allows the unit to have an increased total attack or total defense stat while attacking or defending. How to use height advantage? If a unit is attacking another unit from height, its base is higher than the base of the unit it is targeting, the attacking unit adds +1 when calculating its attack stat. If a unit is defending against an attack and its base is higher than the attacker's, the defending unit adds +1 when calculating total defense. Melee units. A unit with a range stat of 1 is a melee unit, which will be listed next to the range stat on its character board. A melee unit can only attack units it is engaged with. The range stat of melee units cannot be modified. Jump attack. A jump attack is an altered form of the attack action that allows melee units to increase their attack range by leaping through the air to come smashing down on their targets below. How to jump attack? If a melee unit is not engaged with an enemy and has not yet used its attack action and still has the energy for it during its activation, it may be able to jump attack. The target enemy unit must be within 2 range, and its base must be on a lower hex than the attacking unit. The hex the attacker is landing on must be lower than its current position and can't be more than 2 hexes away from the hex the attacker started on. So we're going to say Roland here is going to jump attack Moggy. Place the melee unit on an unoccupied hex adjacent to its target so that the 2 units then become engaged. Step 1.5, do a cool sound effect. Not required, that's optional. Step 2. Use 1 energy to perform an attack action against the targeted unit. During this attack, the attacking unit is considered to have height advantage. After resolving the attack, if the attacker's original position and the hex it landed on causes the unit to be considered falling, the attacker must roll for fall damage. All movement types are subjected to fall damage when jump attacking. However, landing in a water space negates fall damage during jump attacks. So, poor Moggy here gets attacked again. Fa-boom! The attack of a jump attack is considered a simultaneous effect against other effects like engagement triggers. A character can land lower or higher than their target when performing a jump attack, but they must be engaged with the target when landing. Otherwise, they are landing too low or too high. Defeating a unit or character. A unit is defeated when the number of damage markers on its health bar is equal to or greater than that unit's total health. Remove defeated units from the map. So, the steps to take when a character is defeated. If the character was defeated by an attack, skill, or cheap shot, any loot in the defeated character's inventory is transferred to the inventory of the character that defeated it. If defeated by a lost unit, their loot is discarded instead. Then, you remove the defeated character from the map, and play continues. Awakenings. Characters can unlock awakenings, depicted with a yellow border, during the gameplay, which allows them to gain permanent additional stats. How to awaken a character? Survivors can complete trials, find items, use skills, or push the Sentience through phases to unlock awakenings. When a character awakens a stat, remove the marker to reveal the modifier for that stat. The modifier is then unlocked permanently for the remainder of the game. Regarding trials, at the start of the Boss Battle Royale or Skirmish mode, each survivor draws their trial card. Their name will be listed on the trial. The card will show trials or objectives that must be completed by the character to awaken a specified stat. Once a character is fully awakened, they may discard the trial card and draw 1 artifact. For example, Trial, win a contest roll. Reward, awaken your move stat. If a character awakens a stat using a different method, the player no longer has to complete the trial before discarding their card. Buffs and curses. Buff and curse stat modifiers can be gained and removed from characters throughout the game. When a buff or curse is gained by a character, the marker is then removed from the slot for that buff or curse. When a buff or curse is removed from a character, the marker is placed back in the corresponding slot. Buffs and curses can be applied to characters through skills or other events. Some characters cannot receive certain buffs or curses. The corresponding slots on those boards are gray instead of colored. Specifically regarding buffs, buffs are depicted with blue borders, typically increasing a stat and adding a new beneficial effect to the character. If a character has both a buff and a curse applied to the same stat, move, range, attack, or defense, the buff and curse cancel each other out completely regardless of their values. The movement, range, attack, and defense buffs only change the total stats of the character. There are also 2 other types of buffs that have unique effects. The first is stealth. Units with a stealth buff cannot be selected as their direct target of attacks, skills, items, or other effects from units that they are not engaged with. They will still be hit by area of effect attacks, skills, items, or other effects which do not target them directly. There are 2 conditions which will cause a character to lose the stealth buff. The first is that if the unit receives damage in any way, immediately remove the stealth buff. The second is when a character begins their turn and they have the stealth buff but is removed. Now, note that Lost can still target units in stealth to spawn mobs near or move toward them, but they can't directly attack these units from range. Enrage. The next time a unit with the Enrage buff attacks or defends, that unit will add the number of dice listed on the Enrage buff box to its attack or defense roll. After the Enrage buff is used, the buff is immediately removed. Curses, depicted with red borders, typically decrease the stat and add a detrimental effect to the character. The movement, range, attack, and defense curses only change the total stats for the character. There are also 2 other types of curses that have unique effects, the first of which is Affliction. When a character has the Affliction curse, the character will take the amount of damage listed on the Affliction curse at the end of the character's next turn. Once the damage is taken, the Affliction curse is immediately removed. If the character receives the Affliction in the middle of their turn, it will not take effect and be triggered until the end of their next turn. Note that some characters have a positive value on the Affliction curse. If so, the Affliction curse heals that character instead of inflicting damage. In this case, the Affliction curse is still removed at the end of the character's turn, even if no damage is healed. Silence. When a character receives the Silence curse, the character's skills are reset, and it is unable to use any skills. At the end of that character's next turn, the Silence curse is removed. If a character obtains the Silence curse in the middle of their turn, the curse is not removed until after their next turn. And note, Silence affects all skill types unless otherwise stated. Skills. Each character has a certain set of skills on the right of their character board, which can be used during the game. There are several different types of skills that can be used in different scenarios. Skills can alter a unit's stats when the skill is in effect, so remember to add those when calculating total stat numbers. Skills that require a target will use the character's range stat when targeting unless otherwise stated. Some skills have bold text listing requirements to use them, or other information. The first skill type would be ability. A unit can use an ability skill by performing cast ability action. Then there are passives. Passive skills are either always in effect or trigger during a described circumstance. Passive skills do not require a unit to perform cast ability in order to use them. Then there are attack skills. They can be used when a character performs an attack. Only one attack skill can be used during each attack. There are also defense skills. Defense skills can be used when a character defends against an attack. Only one defense skill can be used during each attack. Now let's talk a little bit about luck. Luck is a mechanic that allows characters to trigger special effects when rolling combat dice. On the combat dice, you'll notice one gold-colored attack icon called a lucky hit, and one gold-colored defense icon called a lucky block. Skills or other scenarios may require a certain amount of lucky attack or defense icons to be rolled to trigger different effects or actions. How do you use luck? Well, when rolling combat dice, check the character's skills or trials to see if any have lucky hit or lucky block triggers. If you roll the required number of lucky attacks or defense rolls, trigger the skill's effect or complete the trial. Now let's talk inventory. We'll describe the different types of loot and how characters can carry loot in their inventories. Each character on a team has its own unlimited individual inventory. When a character performs an action which results in the drawing of a card or a collection of a material, that loot is placed into the character's inventory. And a special note, units who belong on the same multi-unit character all share the same inventory with one another. To transfer loot between characters, use a trade action. But what exactly is loot? Well, that just describes anything that can be carried in a character's inventory. Fish, materials, artifacts, and items all fall under loot categories. Loot can be used during a unit's activation without using energy. For instance, a character could eat a fish, use an item, and spend a material to build or craft during their turn without spending any energy. Whenever a loot card is discarded, it is placed back at the bottom of the appropriate draw pile. Items are cards are single-use and trigger special mechanics that can be exceptions to the default rules of the game. Items can be helpful for combat, moving, modifying actions, and more. Items can only be used during the turn of the unit that holds them. However, some items have specific conditions that allow their use outside that unit's turn. When a character deals damage to a lost unit or a player unit in skirmish mode, as the result of an attack or skill, it draws one item card and places it in their inventory. Ding crab. Fish. Fish cards are single-use and assist primarily by helping units regain health, cleanse curses, and gain buffs. Fish can only be consumed during the turn of the unit that holds them. Characters can draw fish cards by successfully completing the fish action. Artifacts can be equipped to a survivor character and provide additional skills, stats, or effects. A survivor can only have one artifact equipped at a time. Skills, stats, and other effects from artifacts are only active when they are equipped. Survivors can draw artifacts either by fully awakening themselves in the Boss Battle Royale and Skirmish modes, or by pushing the Sentience through phases in the Boss Raid mode. On the left side of the artifact card is the name and depiction of the artifact. On the right-hand side, there are 3 sections. First, a new skill that the character acquires. Next is additional stats that are added to the character. Lastly, at the right bottom of the artifact is a unique effect that only works if it is equipped by a specific character which the artifact originates from. When a survivor receives an artifact card, they can immediately equip it. If an artifact is already equipped, they can either swap it or place it in their inventory. At the start of survivor's turn, a player may choose to swap their equipped artifacts with one in their inventory. Equipping an artifact is not considered an action and does not cost any energy. Units may trade artifacts even when they are equipped. Now we're going to go over building and crafting. During the game, characters can use the materials that they have mined to build structures or craft single-use gadgets that enhance specific actions. Building and crafting are not considered actions and therefore do not require the use of energy to perform and can only be done by survivors. The first one we'll take a look at is building. Building allows survivors to use their materials to place additional hexes or structures onto the map during their turn. A unit cannot build while engaged with an enemy. First up, walls. Walls can be built during the game to provide cover or block passages. To build a wall, the active survivor must pay one material from their inventory. Discard the material. Take a wall from the common supply. Place the wall on any unoccupied hex basic land with at least one hex adjacent to the active unit, or on top of another wall with at least one hex adjacent to the active unit. Because the walls are stackable. They cannot be built to completely block off part of the map with no path around them. Roads can be built during the game to gain height or move characters around more quickly. To build roads, the active survivor must be standing on a land or road hex and pay one material, then take 3 road hexes from the common supply. Pay your material, get your 3 hexes. If the unit building the road is not already standing on a road hex, the first road hex must be placed beneath that unit. From there, place the remaining road hexes on any unoccupied hexes adjacent to any other road hexes belonging to the road the unit is standing on. And right here is just a visual example of how easy it is to manipulate and build with source tiles during the game. Roads can be built adjacent to each other regardless of the height difference. Roads cannot be built on top of other roads or on tiles. Roads cannot be built adjacent to each other if the adjacent hex is an overhang. Roads adjacent to each other that are separated by an overhang are also not considered connected. And remember, these are hexes, these are tiles, because they're lower and can't be built on top of. Regarding crafting, crafting allows survivors to use materials to assist with actions or other activities. And in Shadow of Fear, there is going to be cards that remind you of what you can do. So for crafting, it can be done with one material. I'm not going to go over what each one does because they are just affecting the gameplay, but you can do things like hand glider, fishing net, and monster trap. The Lost. The Lost is a term used for the AI in TimeStrike for Boss Battle Royale and Boss Raid game modes. There is the Sentience, mobs, and untamed monsters. They are all considered part of the Lost. Lost to time, these prior inhabitants of the Void will do everything in their power to ensure that no one survives to leave the Void. The Lost will be spawned in and controlled by the Sentience deck. Players can target and attack the Lost in the same way they would target units belonging to another player. Regarding Lost stats, when determining an interaction with a Lost unit, refer to the Sentience stat cards that shows the Lost stats. The stat for move, range, attack, and defense work differently for Lost units than player-controlled units. Lost move. When moving a Lost unit, ignore water and climbing movement penalties. They cannot move through enemy units or friendly units that are engaged with enemies. They cannot move through walls or other structures. Also, the Lost cannot be cheap shot during their movement. Lost range determines the maximum range from which any Lost unit may target a player unit when attacking. Lost attack. The Lost do not roll for attack. The Lost attack instead indicates the number of hits that the Lost automatically inflict when attacking. The defending unit will still roll for defense. Lost defense. The Lost do not roll for defense. The Lost defense stat instead indicates the number of hits that the Lost automatically block when defending. And Lost health. The total health for the Lost monsters can be referenced from their character board or card. The total health for the Sentience is listed at the bottom of the Sentience's stat card and scale per survivor unit that starts in play. For example, Fear has 4 health per survivor. And that's in the Gauntlet mode Phase 1, so they're going to be different per card. Regarding Lost targeting, Lost units will be required to target player units based on parameters like distance or different statuses. The Lost cannot target units climbing on the Sentience. For distance, from the position of the Lost unit, count the number of hexes that the Lost unit would need to move to become engaged or get as close as possible to the target unit. Lost units cannot move through enemy units or structures, which must be considered when measuring distance. For tiebreakers, there may be moments where units are equally targetable by the Lost. Follow the steps below to determine who's the main target. The first tiebreaker would be the target with the lowest defense. Second tiebreaker, the target with the lowest current health. And the final tiebreaker, if the target is still unclear, players will roll the d20 for each unit to determine which unit will be targeted. The Lost unit will then attack the unit with the lowest roll. Spawning the Lost. Sentience cards and other effects can spawn monsters or Sentience mobs during gameplay. Spawning at a target hex. Place the Lost unit at the target hex. If the target hex is occupied, place the unit on the highest unoccupied hex adjacent to the original hex. Note that if there are multiple such hexes, the last player in turn order decides which hex to use. Spawning next to a target unit. You would then place the Lost in the highest hex that is both closest to the Sentience and engaged to the target unit. If there are multiple such hexes, the owner of that target unit decides which hex to use. And when spawning a unit into an engaged position, this immediately triggers an engagement. Regarding Lost movement. When a Lost unit has acquired a target, the Lost unit will then move toward that unit. Lost units will move as close as possible to be engaged with their target. If the target cannot be engaged, the Lost unit will then move toward the nearest hex from which it can attack the target. If the Lost unit cannot reach a hex from which it could attack a unit, it will spend all its movement attempting to get as close as possible to that hex. If there are multiple such hexes, the Lost will move toward the higher hex. If there are multiple such hexes, the owner of the targeted unit will decide where that Lost unit moves. So, for an example with a move of 4, and it being a melee attacker, we know there's no way to attack the target. So it would just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and because it has flying, it doesn't count for height differences or any obstacles, if there would have been any. Now, when it comes to combat with the Lost, attacking them results in this. The Lost do not roll for defense when being attacked. Instead, refer to the Sentience stat card listed in Lost Defense Value. This shows the number of blocks a player unit must surpass when attacking to inflict damage. So for 1, this tentacle would need more than 1 to inflict damage because it automatically gets 1 block. When a character deals damage to a Lost unit as a result of an attacker skill, it draws 1 item card and places it in their inventory. Then, for monsters, place their damage markers on the character board or card. For Sentience, place it at the bottom of the Sentience stat card. Now, with only a health of 1, these things would be relatively easy to get rid of, so 1 damage would kill it, and don't forget to draw your item card. Now, when it comes to being attacked by the Lost do not roll for an attack when attacking players. Instead, again, refer to the Sentience stat card listed under Lost Attack Value. The attacked unit still rolls defense to block these hits. Now we will talk about the Sentience. The Sentience is a massive world boss whose goal is to defeat all teams. If the Sentience defeats all teams in the game is over, and you have lost to the Sentience. Now we'll go over the Sentience's action. When the round ends after all player characters have become exhausted, draw a card from the Sentience action deck. Follow the instructions on the card to play out the Sentience's turn. And those reminders are on the back of the cards that you'll need to draw. Using Tentacle Swipe here as an example. On the Sentience action card, there will be a list of steps that walk players through the turn of the Sentience. After completing each step, the Sentience's turn is over and players can start the next round. When a survivor count is referenced, it's usually based on the initial number of survivors in the game, but may state otherwise. Now let's go over Sentience movement. The Sentience can be moved to a position already occupied by other units or buildings if the center hex, which would be this one in this case, of the Sentience's base is not occupied by another unit. After the Sentience is placed, it should face away from the hex from which it originated and towards its new direction. And here's a visual example of that center hex. Now, when there are walls, uneven ground, units, or other impediments, proceed as follows. Number 1, each unit will be pushed away from the Sentiences, starting with the Sentience's front hex and counting clockwise. If the specified positions are occupied, the player who owns that unit can choose the next closest hex. For lost units, the player moving the Sentience can decide their positions. So we're going to say this is the leading hex. 1, that would move that one, 2, 3, and then 4. So we would push this one out of the way while we were moving. That's using the 4 move stat. And just to visualize that a little different, because it says it's pushed with the front hex would move here, but then this point hex would push that unit to that hex while moving. If the Sentience is placed on a structure, the structure is destroyed. If the Sentience is placed on uneven land hexes, remove the highest hex from under its base. Repeat this process until it rests on at least 5 hexes with the same height. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'd take one more away, and there, now it rests on 5 of the same height. If the Sentience is placed on an overhang or bridge, the Sentience may have a maximum of 2 hexes hanging off the edge in midair. Otherwise, destroy the overhang or bridge and place the Sentience on whichever hexes were directly below it. And again, following the uneven terrain, you'd remove until 5 hexes of the same height would be there. The sentient movement rules apply in all modes, whether the Sentience player is controlled or not. Climbing the Sentience. Climbing onto the Sentience is a core part of the game and is extremely important for survival, power, and rewards. Units on the Sentience cannot be targeted by any friendly or enemy units not on the Sentience. This includes any action, skill, or item cards. Units on the Sentience also cannot target other units that are not on the Sentience. Units on equal or adjacent tiers of the Sentience are considered to be engaged with each other. The Sentience can shake. Whenever a Sentience shake is triggered, all units on the Sentience will be knocked off. In turn order, each player will place their units on an unoccupied hex adjacent to the Sentience. Sentience mobs. The Sentience will have uniquely named units that are referred to as mobs. Mobs will be spawned onto the map throughout the game. Mobs also use the lost stats, same as other monsters, but they only have 1 health. These mobs will have special abilities and can increase the strength of the Sentience, add obstacles, and trigger large-scale damage. In Shadow of Fear, the Sentience mobs are tentacles. These tentacles will be spawned in as Fear continues taking turns. They can be attacked and destroyed. They cannot use the road mechanic. They have a height of 4 and 1 health. When a tentacle is defeated, remove the tentacle from the void and deal 1 damage to Fear. When playing Fear in the Skirmish mode, be sure to grab the Tentacle Mob card. Monsters. There are 2 types of lost monsters in TimeStrike, beasts and brutes. These monsters are summoned throughout the game, slowly becoming an ever greater threat to the player's characters. Sentience cards will frequently cause monsters to attack non-lost units. Monsters can be attacked, tamed, or defeated. Monsters can be tamed. Taming is a mechanic used to capture and recruit lost monsters to a team. Lost beasts and lost brutes can be tamed by survivor units. Tamed monsters can be activated when taking a turn with the character that tamed them. Tamed monsters use the stats on their character board rather than the lost stats. Note that the tamed monsters are no longer considered lost units. Tamed monsters cannot be activated on the turn they were tamed. Regarding tamed beasts. When a beast is tamed, its character card is placed next to the character board of the unit that tamed it. When taking a turn with the character that tamed 1 or more beasts, you may also activate each beast the character has tamed. If a character that tamed 1 or more beasts is defeated, each tamed beast will revert back to a lost unit controlled by the Sentience. Regarding tamed brutes. When a brute is tamed, the unit that tamed it is mounted on top of it. The 2 units are collectively now called a behemoth. When taking a turn with a character that has tamed 1 or more brutes, you may also activate each brute the character has tamed. When activating a unit mounted on a brute, it may no longer use its movement stat, but still uses its own energy to perform actions. So here we have an example of a behemoth. When a survivor is mounted on the back of a tamed brute, it is called a behemoth. Units mounted on tamed brutes are considered to be engaged with that brute, and any other units engaged with the brute may count range starting from any space the brute occupies. Units mounted on tamed brutes cannot be targeted by enemies. Instead, only the brute can be targeted by enemies for attacks or other abilities. If a tamed brute is targeted for an attack and receives any damage from the attack, the mounted unit must also roll defense dice for each hit from that attack. If a tamed brute is defeated, the mount on the unit is placed by its owner on any unoccupied space that the brute previously occupied. Let me read that one more time. If a tamed brute is defeated, the mounted unit is placed by its owner on any unoccupied hex that the brute has previously occupied. If the mounted unit is defeated, the brute reverts to a lost unit and is controlled by the Sentience again. Tame 'em with ding crabs. I know we previously went over some of this, but we're going to quickly go over Boss Battle Royale rules and other things. When playing the Boss Battle Royale, there are a few unique rules and win conditions. Victory is based to be the last team standing after the lost and all enemy player teams are defeated. The lost victory is if all player teams are defeated before the lost are defeated. Then they win. Strategy would be the first to eliminate the loss by defeating the Sentience, then all enemy player teams. Defeating the lost. Attack Fear or its tentacles to inflict damage to Fear. Defeating or taming lost monsters will help keep Fear from regenerating health. Once Fear receives damage markers equal to or exceeding its total health, it is defeated, then all remaining tentacles and lost monsters are removed from the void. At the bottom of Fear's stat card is its health, which scales based upon the number of starting survivors in the void. As Fear takes damage, place markers on this card to track its current health. You also get additional lost rewards. You may gain additional rewards for defeating a lost unit. Defeating a lost monster will grant one item and unlock one awakening to the unit who defeated it. Defeating the Sentience will grant 3 items and unlock all awakenings to the unit who defeated it. Determining initiative in this mode, the player who controls the unit occupying the highest tier on the Sentience when a Sentience card is drawn at the end of each round will have initiative and take the first turn in the following round. If units are on equal tiers of the Sentience then has been defeated, initiative is determined by a d20 roll among the tied units, remaining players with the highest roller taking initiative. Specific to the Boss Battle Royale is the Myth mechanic. It allows players who have been defeated to continue to play and seek revenge on those who may have wronged them during the game. A player can only become a myth if their team is defeated before the Sentience is. Note there's no limits to how many players can become myths. Once the myth is active, the Sentience will shake off all units from tiers of the Sentience in turn order. Players can no longer tame monsters or climb the Sentience. The myth has control of the Sentience every turn. Now, upon a myth being activated, monsters will now act as normal characters for the myth to control. Myths will take their turn during the normal round, using Exhaustion system just like any other remaining players. Cheap shots, rolling combats, buffs, curses, skills, and the Exhaustion system are all in effect. Monsters under the control of a myth use the stats listed on their character board rather than the lost stats. This also means that monsters will no longer move or attack when the Sentience action card is drawn. So how do you play the myth role? Well, the myth's goal is to use the loss to keep any remaining players from winning. Whenever a card from the Sentience deck is drawn, myths also have control of the Sentience card. When a card says to move a tentacle or fear, the myth may choose exactly where they are moving the lost stats. When a card says to spawn a tentacle on a given target, the myth may instead choose that target. Now, touching back on skirmishing. When playing skirmish, there's a few unique rules and win conditions for that. Victory, be the last team standing after all enemy players are defeated. Strategy, just defeat the other enemy teams. When a character deals damage to an enemy unit as a result of an attack or skill, it draws one item card and places it in their inventory. At the end of each round, to determine initiative, each team will roll d20s. The team with the highest roll will go first, with all other teams taking turns in clockwise order. And finally, revisiting the boss raid rules. When playing the boss raid, there's a few unique win conditions and rules. Victory, have at least one survivor alive after Fear is defeated. Strategy, push Fear through multiple phases by first destroying its tentacles, then depleting its health in each phase. Lost cheap shots. Disengaging from the Lost will trigger a cheap shot on players' turns. The Lost do not roll for this cheap shot, they're automatically successful. Sentience phases. Fear has multiple phases in this mode that it'll move through as players deal damage. Each phase has a setup card that spawns monsters and mobs, followed by various other steps like awakening characters or drawing Sentience action cards. And defeating the Lost. Attack Fear or its tentacles to inflict damage to Fear. Once Fear receives damage markers equal to or exceeding its health, it is pushed to the next phase. Depleting the health of Fear in its final phase destroys it and defeats the Lost. At the bottom of Fear's stat card is its health, which scales based on the number of starting survivors in the void. As Fear takes damage, place markers on this card to track its current health. Regarding Fear's tentacles, Fear will never spawn more than 5 tentacles, 2 beasts or 1 brute at a time. So anytime a card has more spawns to be placed but the limit is already met in the void, ignore those spawns. In this mode, all player characters can take their turns simultaneously. For example, you can move one character, then switch to another character to move and perform an action, and then return to the first character and continue playing. This way, you can mix and match play across characters without waiting for each turn to end. And that is everything you need to know to play the 3 modes that come in TimeStrike Shadow of Fear core box. So this is a very interesting game. It takes some familiarity with skirmish and miniatures games and adds some new twists. So if you want to get some friends around the table and try a boss raid, go ahead. If you just want to fight each other, then jump into skirmish. The Boss Battle Royale and Boss Raid are probably where this game shines the most, but it's fun no matter how you play. Thank you, Adventure Together, for putting this game together, and I hope that you have fun.